Absolutely. Here's a great, deep, and detailed summary of the Bhil Risings, explained clearly and simply for total understanding, even if you're a beginner. Bhil Risings, deep, detailed summary, in the simplest words. 1. Who were the Bhils? The Bhils are an old Adivasi tribal group of India. They lived mostly in the forests and hills of western India, especially in Khandesh, North Maharashtra. Bhils were independent, brave, and knew the forests very well. They lived through hunting, farming, and forest produce. They were not used to outside rulers. They lived under their own tribal leaders. 2. What changed? From Marathas to British. Before the British, this area was ruled by the Marathas, especially the Peshwa. The Marathas had some control, but often left the Bhils alone in the forests. But by 1818, the British East India Company defeated the Peshwa and took over this region. Now the Bhils were under direct British rule, and they didn't like it. 3. Why did the Bhils revolt? Main reasons. 1. Loss of freedom. The Bhils were no longer free in their forests. British officers started entering their areas and controlling their land. 2. Harsh taxes and rules. British introduced tax collection, new laws, and punishments. Bhils, being poor farmers and hunters, couldn't handle these changes. 3. Fear and suspicion. The Bhils feared that the British would take away everything: land, forests, culture. 4. Blame on the Peshwa. British believed that Peshwa Baji Rao Sew and his general Trimbakji Danglia were encouraging the Bhils to fight. These were defeated Maratha leaders who still had some secret support. 4. When and how did the revolts happen? First Bhil Rising, 1817 to 1819. The Bhils attacked British outposts, soldiers, and tax collectors. It was violent, and the British were shocked. British sent army units to suppress it. They crushed the Bhils using brutal force, burning villages, killing rebels. Result: the British won the battle, but the Bhils were not at peace. Their anger and hurt remained deep. Second Rising, 1825. In 1825, the Bhils again rose up, this time under a leader named Suram. Why now? Because the British were busy fighting the Burma-Myanmar War. Bhils thought, now is our chance. Result: British again crushed the rebellion, but Bhil dissatisfaction remained strong. Third and Fourth Risings, 1831 and 1846. The Bhils rose again in 1831 and yet again in 1846. These repeated revolts show it wasn't just a small problem. It was a big, popular movement. Many Bhils across years and generations felt the pain of British rule. 5. What does this show? Meaning and importance. The Bhil Risings were one of the early tribal resistances against British rule in India. Even before the famous 1857 revolt, tribes like the Bhils were already fighting for their freedom. These were not just criminal acts, as the British claimed. They were true freedom struggles by forest people trying to protect their land, culture, and independence. Timeline of Bhil Risings, year event, leader, detail. 1817 to 1819. First major revolt. British blamed Peshwa Baji Siskik. 1825, second revolt, led by Saram. 1831, third revolt. Popular anger continues. 1846, fourth revolt. Still strong resistance remains. Conclusion. The Bhil Risings were not just about tax or land. They were about dignity, freedom, and identity. The Bhils never accepted British rule quietly. Their continued revolts across 4 different years show their spirit of resistance. These risings are a valuable part of India's freedom story, especially showing how even the poorest tribal groups understood and fought for their rights. If you'd like this as a PDF poster, comic strip, or video script, just ask. I'll happily make it. Here is a great, deep, detailed summary of the Koli Risings, explained in the most simple and clear way, like teaching a total beginner. Who were the Kolis? The Kolis were a tribal community. They lived in the western part of India near the Bhils, especially in parts of today's Maharashtra and Gujarat. They lived in hilly or forested areas and had their own small forts for protection. They followed their own leaders, customs, and ways of living, separate from kings or big governments. What was the problem? 1. British took over. In the early 1800s, the British East India Company started ruling this area. The Colis did not like this new rule because their freedom was gone. Their forts were destroyed. British laws were introduced. The British ignored local leaders. 2. Unemployment and suffering. Earlier, the Colis worked as soldiers, fort guards, or forest workers. But under British rule, their forts were broken, old jobs were lost, many became jobless, they had no income and no support. Why did the Colis revolt? The Colis revolted because they were angry at losing their freedom, upset about unemployment, afraid of the new British system, worried that their way of life would be destroyed. Like anyone else, when people lose jobs, land, and respect, they feel helpless and angry. That's what happened to the Colis. When did the Colis rise in rebellion? They rose up in 1829, 1839, 1844 to 1848. This shows they kept fighting for nearly 20 years, again and again. They wanted to protect their land, their independence, and their way of life. What happened during these risings? The Colis attacked British offices, refused to follow their orders, and tried to regain their freedom. The British, as usual, responded with force. They sent soldiers to crush the Colis. Many Colis were killed, arrested, or punished. But even after being crushed, the Coli spirit remained strong. They kept rising again and again. Final points. Easy summary explanation. Who? Colis, a tribal group from Western India. Where? Near the Bhils, mostly Maharashtra, Gujarat. What happened? British destroyed forts and changed the system. Why revolt? Colis lost jobs, homes, and freedom. When? Rebellions in 1829, 1839, 1844 to 48. Result? British crushed them, but Colis resisted again. Example to understand better. Imagine if your family lived in a village for generations. You protected your home with walls, like forts. Suddenly, a new ruler comes, breaks your walls, takes your job, and says you must follow new rules. You would feel angry, scared, and helpless. You and your neighbors would want to fight back. That's exactly what the Colis did. If you want, I can also make a colored comic strip of this, or explain using a story-style example. Here is a great, deep, detailed summary of the Kutch Rebellion in the most simple and easy English, like teaching a total beginner or child. Where did it happen? It happened in Kutch and Kathiawar, two regions in western India, in present-day Gujarat. Who was ruling there? A local king named Rao Barmal was ruling Kutch, but there were many powerful chiefs, local landlords, who didn't like him. These chiefs were from a group called Jarajas. They supported British rule. Why was there a problem? There was a struggle, fight for power, between Rao Barmal, the king, and the pro-Jaraja chiefs who supported British rule. The British got involved in this power struggle. What did the British do? In 1819, the British sent their army. They defeated and removed Rao Barmal from the throne. But they did not end his family's rule. Instead, they made his baby son the new ruler. Since the son was a baby, the British set up a regency council, a group of people to govern for the baby king. The British resident, a British officer, supervised everything. What made the people angry? 1. New British-style administration, government. The British made many new rules. These changes were very different from the old Indian system. 2. High land revenue. The British demanded more tax from the farmers. The people felt it was too much and unfair. So the people and chiefs became very angry and restless. When did rebellion happen? In 1820s, the British were losing a war in Burma, Burman War. When the people of Kutch heard this, they thought, the British are weak now. Let's fight them. The local chiefs and people rebelled. They wanted Rao Barmal to be king again. What did the British do? The rebellion was big and strong. So the British had to send many soldiers to control the situation. Violent fighting happened. Eventually the British defeated the rebels. Did it happen again? Yes. The trouble erupted again in 1831. This shows that the people were still unhappy. They didn't like British rule and wanted local control. British do later. The British realized that force alone won't work. So they followed a conciliatory policy. This means they tried to calm the people. They made some compromises. They tried to reduce anger by being friendlier. Final simple summary. The Kutch Rebellion was caused by a fight for power between a king and local chiefs, British interference in local politics, heavy taxes and new rules by British officers. People rose in revolt, especially when they thought the British were weak. The rebellion showed how unhappy Indians were with British rule. Even after fighting, the anger didn't fully go away. Let me know if you'd like a line-by-line or word-by-word explanation, a colored comic strip for this story, or a timeline chart to remember it easily. Here is a great, deeply detailed, and very simple summary of the Wagera Rising, 1818 to 1820, explained like a story, step by step, so that even a total beginner can understand. The Wagera Rising, 1818-20, deep, simple summary. Who were the Wageras? The Wageras were a local warrior tribe who lived in Oka Mandal, a coastal region in present-day Gujarat, India, near the Arabian Sea. They were known for their independence, fierce spirit, and strong resistance to outsiders. Their life was deeply connected to their land, traditions, and freedom. What caused the revolt? The Wagera Rising happened mainly because of three major reasons. 1. British interference and control. The British East India Company was trying to control many parts of India, including Gujarat. They started imposing their rule on the local people of Oka Mandal. The Wageras hated this foreign domination because it took away their freedom and self-rule. 2. Support to Gaikwar of Baroda. The British were helping the local king, the Gaikwar of Baroda, to expand his power. The Gaikwar, supported by the British, started demanding high taxes and payments from the Wageras. These payments were called exactions, unfair and forced money collection. The Wageras felt cheated, exploited, and disrespected. 3. Loss of autonomy and humiliation. They were proud warriors, and they didn't like being treated like servants by a foreign power. Humiliated when the British and the Gaikwar acted as if the Wageras were under their command. How did the rising happen? Phase 1. Outbreak of Rebellion, 1818. Wagera chiefs, angered by British actions, decided to rebel. They picked up arms, weapons, and started attacking British-controlled areas. These attacks were known as entries into enemy lands to attack, loot, or disrupt. Phase 2. Resistance, 1818-1819. From 1818 to 1819, the Wageras carried out multiple raids into British territories. They used guerrilla-style tactics, like sudden surprise attacks, and knew the local geography well. The British struggled to stop them at first because the Wageras were quick, determined, and had local support. Phase 3. Decline in peace, 1820. Over time, the British gathered more forces and started controlling the situation. After many skirmishes and battles, both sides realized that fighting was not helping. Finally, in November 1820, a peace treaty was signed between the British and the Wagera chiefs. End result of the rising. The rebellion was crushed, and the Wageras had to surrender. But their rising showed the spirit of resistance that many small Indian communities had even before 1857. The Wagera revolt was one of the early signs that Indians would not easily accept foreign rule. Why is this revolt important? Even though it was small in scale, it represents the local anger and early revolts against British oppression. It shows how even tribes and small kingdoms valued freedom. The Wagera Rising is part of a long chain of revolts that built up to the First War of Independence in 1857. Summary in one sentence. The Wageras of Gujarat, angry at the British support for oppressive local rulers and loss of freedom, rose in rebellion between 1818 and 1820, fought bravely, and finally signed a peace treaty after 2 years of conflict. Would you like me to now create a comic strip version of this summary with colored scenes, like a storybook? Sure. Here's a great deep summary of the Surat Salt agitation of 1844 to 1848 in the simplest and clearest language possible, like teaching a beginner or a student step by step. Surat Salt agitation, 1844 to 1848. Deep detailed summary. 1. Where and when it happened. Place, Surat, a major city in Gujarat, Western India. Time, between 1844 and 1848, during early British rule in India. 2. What was the main issue? A. Salt tax increase, 1844. The British government raised the tax on salt in 1844. Earlier, the salt duty tax was 50 paise. Suddenly, it was increased to 1 rupee, which is double the amount. Why was this a problem? Salt is a basic need. Everyone uses it daily, especially poor people. Making it expensive hurt the poor the most. The people saw this as unfair, greedy, and oppressive. 3. Public reaction. The people of Surat were famous for resisting unfair government actions. When the salt tax was raised, strong protests broke out. People expressed deep anger and discontent, unhappiness. Their protests spread widely and gained mass support. 4. From anti-tax to anti-British. At first, people were just angry about the salt tax. But slowly, their anger turned against the British rulers themselves. They realized that British rule was unfair and not for the benefit of Indians. The protest spirit changed from just a tax protest to a bigger freedom feeling. 5. Tensions rise. Attacks on British. The mood in Surat became very intense. Some angry people even attacked Europeans, British officers and people. This showed how serious the public frustration had become. 6. British government surrenders. The British rulers saw the huge protests. They understood that the people were not going to accept this silently. So they canceled the new salt tax. This was a big victory for the people. 7. Second protest. Standard weights, 1848. In 1848, the British again tried to introduce a new rule. They wanted to change the weights and measures used in Surat to the Bengal standard system. But the people refused to accept this. How did they protest? They used boycott, not buying or selling. They used passive resistance, meaning they protested peacefully, without violence. Their determined non-cooperation forced the British to withdraw the new system again. 8. Significance of the Surat Salt agitation. An example of people's power. This agitation was an early sign that Indians would not accept injustice quietly. It showed how unity and peaceful protest could bring results. B. Awakening of anti-British feeling. The salt tax agitation made people see British rule as exploitative. This was the beginning of people's political awakening in Western India. C. Use of nonviolent resistance. Even before Gandhi's Salt March in 1930, the people of Surat in 1844-48 were already using nonviolent methods. They boycotted, refused to cooperate, and stood firm, peacefully but powerfully. Conclusion in simplest words. The Surat Salt agitation was one of the earliest and strongest public protests against British rule. It began with a simple issue, salt tax, but became a larger political movement. The people of Surat proved that united public protest, even peaceful, could make the British government change its mind. It was a major step forward in India's journey toward freedom. Would you like this as a comic strip or an easy printable chart too? Absolutely. Here's a great, deeply detailed, and very easy to understand summary of the Ramosi Risings, explained like I'm teaching someone who knows nothing about it, with full context, background, and meaning. Detailed summary of the Ramosi Risings. Who were the Ramosis? The Ramosis were a tribal or martial community living mostly in the Western Ghats, especially in Maharashtra. In earlier times, during Maratha rule, they served as soldiers, guards, and watchmen. They were seen as useful and brave. But when the British took control, they ignored and marginalized the Ramosis. The British saw them as lawless, even calling them a criminal tribe later on, a cruel and unfair labels. Why did the Ramosis revolt? 1. Loss of their traditional status. Under the British, the Ramoses lost their jobs and roles. They were no longer respected or employed like they were under the Maratha kings. 2. Harsh British rule. The British brought new laws, taxes, and strict controls. They didn't understand or respect local customs and lifestyles. 3. Anger and humiliation. The Ramoses felt ignored, mistreated, and insulted. They were angry at being treated like criminals by the British system. The First Ramosi Revolt. In 1822, the revolt was led by Chittor Singh, a strong leader of the Ramoses. He and his followers rose up against the British, starting in the Satara region in Maharashtra. They looted towns and villages, not for greed, but as rebellion. This was their way of saying, "We reject your rule and your ways." Continuing trouble. 1825 to 1829. Even after the 1822 revolt was crushed, the Anger did not die. More small uprisings took place in 1825 and 1826. The area around Satara remained unstable and tense until 1829. The British could not fully control or pacify the Ramoses. The turning point. Removal of Raja Pratap Singh, 1839. In 1839, the British removed from the throne, Raja Pratap Singh, the king of Satara. They also banished him from his own kingdom. He was seen by locals as a symbol of pride and culture. His removal caused deep resentment, especially among Maratha loyalists and local people. New revolts, 1840 to 1841. Because of the king's removal, new revolts broke out. There were a chain of disturbances, meaning protests, attacks, and unrest spread in many places. One leader, Narsingrao Dattatreya Petkar, took charge of the resistance. Narsingrao's brave act. Narsingrao gathered a large number of troops, people still loyal to the Maratha king. He led them to capture the fort of Badami, a major fort in Karnataka. He raised the flag of Raja Pratap Singh on the fort. This was a powerful symbol of rebellion. He was saying, "Our king is still the rightful ruler. We don't accept British rule." British response. Crushing the movement. The British sent a strong and superior army. They retook Badami Fort, defeated the rebels, and restored British control. The Ramosi resistance was crushed, but the spirit of rebellion lived on. Final thoughts. Why this is important. The Ramosi Risings were early rebellions in British India before the big revolt of 1857. These risings were not random violence. They were resistance movements against injustice and foreign rule. They show us how tribal groups like the Ramoses were pushed to the edge, how loyalty to Indian kings like Raja Pratap Singh remained strong, how British rule caused deep pain and loss among many Indian communities. Even though the British won, these risings were early signs of Indian anger, the same anger that would later grow into a national freedom movement. In simple words, the Ramoses were once proud warriors, but the British disrespected and sidelined them. They fought back, led by brave men like Chittor Singh and Narsingrao Petkar. They stood up for their dignity, king, and freedom. Their revolts may not have succeeded, but their courage became part of India's long journey to freedom. Would you like this turned into a comic strip with images to make it even easier to remember? Here is a great, deep, and very simple summary of the Kolhapur and Savantwadi revolts, explained like you're a total beginner. What were these revolts? They were small uprisings or revolts that happened in two places in western India. 1. Kolhapur. 2. Savantwadi. Both happened because people were angry at what the British did after 1844. Where is this happening? Kolhapur, a princely state in Maharashtra. Savantwadi, another small princely state nearby, near Goa. Why did people revolt? 1. In Kolhapur, after 1844, the British changed the way the Kolhapur state was run. This is called administrative reorganization, a big word meaning changing the system of running the state. These changes made life harder for local people. One big change, the British removed a special group of soldiers called the Gadkaris. Who were the Gadkaris? The Gadkaris were a hereditary military class. This means their fathers, grandfathers, and ancestors had always been soldiers. They used to protect forts and do army work. It was their only job and the way they earned money and respect. When the British removed them from their jobs, they were suddenly jobless and angry. What did the Gadkaris do? They revolted, started fighting. They captured 2 forts, Samangar Fort, Budargar Fort. This was their way of saying, "We will not accept being removed like this. We want our rights back." What about Savantvari? In Savantvari, people were already unhappy, discontent with British actions. This anger grew stronger and finally led to a revolt, fighting back. Even though details are fewer, it shows that many regions were upset with British interference. Why is this important? It shows that British changes hurt many local groups, especially those who lost jobs, power, or rights. The Gadkaris show us that when people's traditional jobs were taken away, they didn't just accept it, they fought back. These revolts were early signs of Indian resistance before the big revolt of 1857. Very simple example. Imagine if a school suddenly removed all teachers who belonged to a family of teachers. Those teachers had taught for generations. Now they have no jobs, no money, no respect. Would they be angry? Yes. What if they took over a classroom and said, "We are not leaving until we get justice"? That is exactly what the Gadkaris did, but with forts. Summary in one line. In 1844, the British removed traditional soldiers called Gadkaris from Kolhapur, causing them to revolt and capture forts, while similar anger led to a revolt in Savantvari. Would you like me to now make a colored comic strip of this explanation too? Sure. Here's a great, deeply detailed, and very simple summary of the revolts in South India, especially focusing on the revolt of the Raja of Vizianagaram and the Poligar rebellions. This summary is made to be super clear, even if you are new to history. It explains not just what happened, but also why and how, with full background and meaning. Deep, detailed summary. Revolts in South India against British rule, 1765 to 1856. Between 1765 and 1856, South India saw several local revolts against British East India Company rule. These revolts were mostly led by local kings, like the Raja of Vizianagaram, and chieftains, called Poligars, who had once ruled small areas independently. These leaders and their people were angry because of the British government's unfair, greedy, and disrespectful behavior. Part 1. The Revolt of the Raja of Vizianagaram, 1794, the British. Background. In 1765, the British East India Company took over a region in Andhra Pradesh called the Northern Sarkars. The local ruler there was the Raja of Vizianagaram, who had earlier cooperated with the British. What caused the revolt? The British behaved high-handedly, meaning very bossy, unfair, and disrespectful. They, 1, demanded a present of 3,000 from the Raja, like a forced bribe. 2, ordered him to disband his army so he couldn't defend himself anymore. These 2 demands were seen as insults and attacks on the Raja's independence. The revolt. The Raja refused to obey these orders. In response, the British seized his estate, meaning they took away his land. The Raja, with full support from his troops and the people, began a rebellion. A battle took place in 1794, in which the Raja was killed while fighting bravely. Aftermath. The British realized they had made a mistake. To calm the situation and avoid more trouble, they gave the estate back to the Raja's son, reduced their unfair demands. This revolt showed the British that Indian rulers and people could resist, and that being too greedy or arrogant could cause trouble for them. Part 2. Poligar Rebellions, 1801 to 1856. Who were Poligars? Poligars, also called Palayakarars, were local warrior chiefs in South India. They ruled small territories and collected taxes from the farmers. They had their own armies and were respected by the local people. Why did Poligars revolt? The British, 1, took away the Poligars' rights to collect tax. 2, forced a new land revenue system where farmers had to pay high taxes directly to the British. 3, tried to disband the Poligar armies, making them powerless. 4, treated the Poligars rudely, as if they were no longer important. These actions hurt the pride, income, and authority of the Poligars, so they rebelled. Major revolts. From 1801 to 1805, many Polygars revolted in areas like Dindigul, Tamil Nadu, Malabar, Kerala, North Arcot, Tamil Nadu, ceded districts, Rayalaseema, Andhra Pradesh. These revolts included fighting with weapons, attacking British troops, and protecting villages. Continued resistance. Even after these major uprisings were suppressed, smaller rebellions continued all across the Madras Presidency until 1856. These were not organized into one big revolt, but many small scattered uprisings by local leaders and people who were unhappy with British rule. Why these revolts matter. 1. They showed that many Indians were not ready to accept British rule silently. 2. They were early signs of Indian resistance, much before the Great Revolt of 1857. 3. These revolts showed the bravery and leadership of local kings and chiefs who stood up for their people. 4. The revolts forced the British to sometimes step back, change their behavior, or make compromises. Simple analogy to help you understand. Imagine a school where local teachers, Rajas Polygars, are teaching freely. Suddenly, an outside principal, British, comes and says, "Give me money. Stop teaching. I will take over your class. Follow my rules only." The teachers and students get angry and fight back to take control of their own school again. That's exactly what happened in these South Indian revolts. Final points to remember. Point, explanation. Time period, 1765 to 1856. Main reason, British took power, land, and money from local rulers. Leaders, Raja of Vizianagaram, Polygars of South India. Causes, heavy taxes, loss of land, disrespect, disbanding of armies. Nature of rebellion, armed revolts supported by local people. Result, some revolts were crushed, but they inspired later freedom fighters. If you want, I can now give you a timeline chart, a map of revolt locations, comic strips of these events, quiz to test your understanding. Would you like one of these? Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of Diwan Velu Thampi's revolt in the simplest language, with extra context to help you understand everything clearly like a beginner. Who was Velu Thampi? Velu Thampi was a Diwan chief minister of the Kingdom of Travancore in present-day Kerala. He was a brave and patriotic leader, and he loved his land and people. Background of the revolt. In 1805, the British Governor-General, Lord Wellesley, forced the King of Travancore to sign something called a subsidiary alliance. What is a subsidiary alliance? A treaty, agreement, where the Indian king must keep British troops in his territory. The king must pay money, called a subsidy, for their maintenance. The king cannot keep his own big army or make deals with other rulers without British permission. This made the Indian rulers feel like puppets with no real power. Why did Velu Thampi revolt? 1. Harsh terms. The agreement forced Travancore to pay huge amounts of money to the British. 2. Debt problems. The Travancore king could not afford to pay the subsidy, so he fell into arrears, missed payments. 3. British pressure. The British resident, their official in Travancore, was very rude and bossy. He started acting like he ruled Travancore. This made the people, nobles, and army angry. Velu Thampi's revolt begins. Velu Thampi, as Diwan, had had enough. He raised a rebellion, took support from the Nair Battalion, Travancore's traditional warrior caste and soldiers, made emotional speeches urging Indians to fight the British. He is famous for the Kundara Proclamation, where he told people to rise up and defend their freedom. British response. The British were shocked. They sent a large army to suppress the rebellion, fought battles with Velu Thampi's forces, defeated the revolt after fierce fighting. End of Velu Thampi. Velu Thampi, after fort and battles, went into hiding, did not want to be caught by the British. Finally, ended his own life rather than be prisoner. Though the revolt failed, Velu Thampi became a symbol of bravery. He was one of the earliest Indian leaders to rise up against British rule. His revolt showed that even local leaders and small kingdoms could resist the British. He is still remembered in Kerala as a hero and freedom fighter. In short, question, answer. Where did the revolt happen? Travancore, Kerala. Who led it? Diwan Velutampi. When? Around 1805 to 1809. Why did it happen? Harsh British treaty, forced payments, rude resident. What happened? Velutampi led a revolt with army support. What was the result? Revolt failed. Velutampi died. British won. Why is it important? Early example of Indian resistance to British power. Would you like a colored comic strip of this too?
Of course. Here's a great, deep and detailed summary of the Wahhabi movement, rich in meaning, clear in structure, and easy to understand, like a full story. I've added context, background, goals, methods, and significance to give you the complete picture. Wahhabi movement, deep, detailed summary. Background. Why did this movement start? In the 18th and 19th centuries, Indian Muslims were facing moral and religious decline. Many customs and practices had been added to Islam that were not originally part of it. Political decline. The Mughal Empire was collapsing and Muslims were no longer in power. British rule was spreading fast across India. Many Indian Muslims felt lost, powerless, and divided. To fix this situation, religious reformers came forward. One of the biggest movements among them was the Wahhabi movement. Syed Ahmad of Raebareli, 1786 to 1831, was the main leader. He was a religious scholar and warrior. He was deeply influenced by 1. Abdul Wahhab of Arabia 1703 to 1787, who led a movement to purify Islam by removing new customs called the Wahhabi movement in Arabia. 2. Shah Waliullah of Delhi 1702 to 1762, who preached reform and unity among Muslims in India. Goals of the Wahhabi movement. 1. Religious purification. Remove all un-Islamic practices, superstitions and customs. Return to the original pure form of Islam as practiced by Prophet Muhammad and his companions. End the division among Muslims like Shia versus Sunni fights. 2. Establish Islamic rule. Remove British rule and other non-Islamic rulers. Create a true Islamic state, Darul Islam, based on Sharia, Islamic law. 3. Unite Muslims politically. Bring Muslims together under one leader imam. Revive the spirit of jihad, religious struggle against injustice. Main ideas and beliefs. Islam had become corrupt due to local traditions, festivals, saint worship, etc. These practices were seen as bid'ah, innovations, and shirk, associating partners with God. Muslims must live life exactly as Prophet Muhammad did. Jihad was not just personal. It also meant fighting against unjust rulers like the British. How was the movement organized? Syed Ahmad was not just a preacher, he was also a planner and leader. He created a powerful, secretive, and disciplined organization. He was accepted as the imam, leader, by his followers. Appointed 4 caliphs, deputy leaders, to manage different zones. Created a network of agents, followers, and teachers across India. Used secret codes and messages for communication to avoid British attention. Set up branches, missions in Patna, main centre, Hyderabad, Madras, Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Bombay. Set up a base in Sithana, in the northwest frontier, now in Pakistan, which they called Darul Islam, Land of Islam. Strategy of jihad. Syed Ahmad believed that peaceful preaching was not enough. Muslims had to fight, do jihad to remove British and Sikh rule. He and his followers travelled to the northwest frontier to wage war against the Sikh empire of Ranjit Singh. The plan was, defeat the Sikhs first, then go after the British. But what happened to the movement? 1. Battle of Balakot, 1831. Syed Ahmad and his forces fought the Sikhs in a big battle, but they were badly defeated. Syed Ahmad was killed in the battle. This was a huge setback for the movement. 2. Continued resistance. Even after his death, his followers didn't give up. From 1831 to 1860s, they continued secretly fighting the British from the hills and villages. They used guerrilla tactics, preached in mosques, and raised small armies. 3. British response. The British saw this as a dangerous rebellion. They launched military campaigns against Wahhabi strongholds. Many followers were arrested, jailed, exiled, or executed. The movement was finally crushed by the 1870s. Where did it spread? The Wahhabi movement was not limited to one place. It had supporters in Bihar, especially Patna, the main centre, Bengal, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, Hyderabad and South India. Why is this movement important? 1. Religious reform. It encouraged Muslims to learn true Islam, read the Quran and remove false customs, help build a strong religious identity among Indian Muslims. 2. Early freedom struggle. It was one of the first serious and organised anti-British movements. Happened decades before 1857. The Wahhabis were among the early freedom fighters. 3. Unity and organisation. Showed how strong organisation, planning and leadership can create massive movements, even without modern technology. Connected Muslims across India, creating a sense of nationwide unity. In short, 30-second summary. The Wahhabi movement was a powerful Islamic reform and anti-British movement started by Syed Ahmad of Raebareli in the early 1800s. It aimed to return to pure Islam, remove British rule, and create a true Islamic society. With secret networks, a base in the northwest, and followers across India, it continued even after Syed Ahmad's death in 1831. Though finally suppressed by the British, it left a deep impact on religious reform and the freedom struggle in India. Would you like a timeline of events? Map showing where it spread? Comic-style story? MCQs or questions to test yourself? I can make any of these to help you remember better. Here's your deep, detailed and very simple summary of the Wahhabi movement, Part 2, 1830s to 1890s, explained like a story, with every point easy to remember and understand. Detailed summary of the Wahhabi movement, Part 2, a Muslim religious movement that fought the Sikhs and British in India. Background. What Wahhabis believed. The Wahhabis were Muslim revivalists. They believed Islam had been changed or diluted and needed to be purified. Their goal, bring back the pure original Islam like in the time of Prophet Muhammad. They wanted India to become Darul Islam, which means a land ruled by Islamic laws. Any place ruled by non-Muslims was Darul Harb, land of war, and they believed it should be converted by jihad, holy war. Wahhabis versus the Sikh kingdom. In the early 1830s, Wahhabis first focused on fighting the Sikh Empire in Punjab under Maharaj Ranjit Singh. In 1830, they captured Peshawar, a major city, but in 1831, Sikhs defeated them in the Battle of Balakot. Their leader, Syed Ahmad Barelvi, died in this battle. This was a major setback, but the movement continued. Wahhabis versus British rule. After the British defeated the Sikhs and took over Punjab in 1849, the Wahhabis made the British their main enemy. Their dream of Islamic rule in Punjab was over, so they turned to fight the British rulers of India. Role in the 1857 revolt. During the 1857 revolt, India's first war of independence, the Wahhabis spread messages against the British. They told people that the British were against Islam and must be removed. However, their exact military role in the 1857 revolt is not clearly known. They may have worked underground or supported others in secret. Their base in Sithana and British fear. Wahhabis had a strong base in Sithana, a hilly area near the northwest frontier, near today's Pakistan-Afghanistan border. British feared that Wahhabis could team up with Afghanistan or Russia during any future war. This made the Wahhabis look very dangerous to the British. British attacks on Wahhabis. In the 1800s, the British launched many military attacks on the Wahhabi base in Sithana. Tribes from the border hills supported the Wahhabis in battle. In India, the British arrested Wahhabis and sedition, rebelling against the government. Some Wahhabis were jailed, exiled, or even executed. Decline of the movement. After these heavy attacks, the movement lost strength. It was no longer a big national threat. But some Wahhabis still helped tribal groups fight the British in the 1880s and 1890s. Nature and impact of the Wahhabi movement. The Wahhabi movement was led by Muslims, for Muslims, focused only on creating Islamic rule. It was not a nationalist movement. It did not fight for freedom for all Indians, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, etc. It fought only to bring back Islamic law. Its biggest impact was it made some Muslims feel separate from other communities. It created isolationist and separatist feelings among Muslims that would have long-lasting effects. Final takeaway: what was the Wahhabi movement? The Wahhabi movement, early 1800s to late 1800s, was a religious political movement started by Muslims who wanted to restore Islamic rule in India. It began with a war against the Sikhs, then shifted to fighting the British. Although it failed to achieve its goals, it was one of the earliest organized Islamic resistance movements in India, but it did not aim for Indian unity or independence for all. It was religious, not nationalist. Memory hack: 5 quick points to remember. 1. Who? Muslims led by Syed Ahmad Barelvi. 2. What? Wanted to turn India into Darul Islam, Islamic land. 3. First target? Sikh Kingdom of Punjab, lost and Syed Ahmad died. 4. Then target? British Empire after 1849. 5. End result? Failed. Crushed by British, but influenced Muslim separatism. Would you like me to turn this into printable notes? Comic strip of Part-2? Timeline map? Flashcards for revision? Just say the word, I'll craft it all for you in simple style. Sure. Here's a great deep detailed summary of the Piker Rebellion 1817, written in very simple language, covering everything important step by step, so you fully understand what happened, why it happened, who was involved, and what it led to. The Piker Rebellion 1817, deep detailed summary, big uprising against British rule. 1. Who were the Pikers? Pikers were traditional soldier farmers in Odisha. In times of peace, they worked as farmers. In times of war, they became soldiers and fought for the king. They served the Gajapati kings of Odisha, especially in the Kurda kingdom, near Puri. They had a special position in society and were given land by the kings for their service. Example: a man named Hari grows rice on his land during peace. But if war breaks out, he picks up a sword and joins the army to defend the king. Hari is a Piker. 2. British rule changes everything. After the British took control of Odisha, the Pikers were no longer respected. Their lands were taken away. Their privileges and titles were cancelled. They had to pay heavy taxes to British revenue officers. British officers treated them and the people of Odisha very harshly. Even tribal people, zamindars, landowners, and village leaders were troubled by British policies. So the Pikers, once proud and powerful, were now poor, insulted, and angry. 3. Who was Bakshi Jagabandhu? Bakshi Jagabandhu, also spelled Bakshi Jagabandhu, was the chief commander of the Piker army under the Gajapati king of Kurda. He came from a noble family that had been military leaders for generations. The British snatched his land and wealth, which made him furious. He became the leader of the rebellion against the British. 4. The rebellion starts March 1817. In March 1817, Bakshi Jagabandhu led the Pikers in open revolt. He was joined by displaced Pikars, tribal groups from the forests, zamindars, landlords, village heads, common peasants and farmers. The rebels attacked British offices, burned police stations, and looted treasuries as they marched toward Kurda. 5. Why did so many join the rebellion? Because everyone was suffering under British rule. Group: why they were angry. Pikers lost land, status, jobs. Tribals pushed out of forests. Zamindars lost control and income. Farmers forced to pay high taxes. Village leaders no longer respected. It became more than just a fight by Pikers. It became a people's movement. 6. How the rebellion spread. The rebellion spread from Kurda to other areas of Odisha like Puri, Cuttack, Ganjam, Balasore. The British were shocked and unprepared. For a time, the rebels controlled many parts of Odisha. 7. British strike back. The British quickly brought in more soldiers from nearby areas. They had better weapons, guns and cannons, while Pikars used swords, bows and spears. Slowly, the British began to defeat the rebels in battle. 8. Guerrilla warfare in the forests. Even after the defeat, the pikers didn't give up. They ran into thick forests and used guerrilla tactics. Small surprise hit-and-run strategy, disappearing into the jungles. This continued for many years, especially in areas like Kandhamal. 9. End of the rebellion. The British used strong force and clever tactics to slowly crush the rebellion. In 1825, Baxi Jagabandhu was captured, or some sources say he surrendered. He was kept as a prisoner in Cuttack. He died there in 1829. 10. Legacy and importance. The Piker Rebellion was one of the first large-scale uprisings against British rule in India, 40 years before the 1857 revolt. It was a mass movement involving soldiers, farmers, tribals, landlords and villagers. Today it is remembered as the first war of independence by the people of Odisha. In 2017, the Indian government celebrated 200 years of the rebellion. At final highlights. Topic. Key point. Year, 1817. Place, Odisha, mainly Kurda. Leader, Baxi Jagabandhu. Rebels, pikers, tribals, zamindars, farmers. Actions, burned police stations, looted treasuries. Later phase, guerrilla war from forests. End. Jagabandhu imprisoned in 1825, died 1829. Legacy, first major anti-British revolt in Odisha. Why it matters. The Piker Rebellion shows that Indian resistance to British rule began much earlier than 1857. It was a fight not just by kings, but by common people. It teaches us about unity, bravery, and standing up against injustice. Would you like this as a comic strip? Animated video? Timeline chart? Short play or drama? Let me know, I'll prepare it in the best way for you. Here is a great, deep and detailed summary of the Kittur-Chennamma Rebellion, 1824 to 1829, explained in the simplest step-by-step structure so you can understand everything easily and fully. Kittur-Chennamma Rebellion, 1824-9. The first Indian queen to stand against British rule. 1. Who was Kittur-Chennamma? Chennamma was the queen of Kittur, a small kingdom in Karnataka, South India. She was born in 1778 and trained in horse riding, sword fighting, and archery from a young age. After the death of her husband, she became the ruler of Kittur. She is remembered as one of the first Indian women to lead an armed rebellion against the British. Background. What triggered the rebellion? Doctrine of lapse. This was a British policy introduced by Governor-General Lord Dalhousie, officially after 1848, but followed informally earlier too. It said, if a ruler died without a biological son and had adopted a son, the British would not accept that adopted son as heir. Instead, they would take over the kingdom. Problem. Many Indian kings had no real sons and used adoption. This policy threatened many Indian kingdoms. 3. What happened in Kittur? Year 1824. The king of Kittur died in 1824. Queen Chennamma adopted a boy named Shivalingappa to be the next ruler. But the British refused to accept him, using the doctrine of lapse. They wanted to annex, take over Kittur and rule it directly. This made Chennamma angry and determined to fight back. 4. Chennamma's first rebellion, 1824. Chennamma raised an army of local warriors. She was supported by Sangoli Rayana, a fearless local leader and her loyal commander. Chennamma wrote letters to British officers asking them not to take her kingdom, but they ignored her. First battle. In October 1824, British officers marched toward Kittur to seize it. Chennamma's forces fought bravely. The British were defeated in the first battle. A British officer, Thackeray, was killed in the war. 2 British officers were captured by Kittur's army. Chennamma released the British prisoners later as a gesture of peace. 5. British come back stronger. The British got angry and embarrassed by the defeat. They sent a larger army, led by Colonel Deacon. Chennamma and her army again resisted, but this time the British used better weapons and strategy. Kittur was finally captured by the British. Queen Chennamma was taken prisoner. She was sent to Bailhongal Fort, where she was kept in isolation. 6. The second phase, Sangoli Rayana's guerrilla warfare. Even after Chennamma's arrest, her brave supporter Sangoli Rayana did not stop fighting. He started war, attacking British camps suddenly, hiding in forests and hills, avoiding big battles, using surprise attacks. He was supported by villagers, common people, loyal Khitta soldiers. To install the adopted heir Lingappa as the rightful ruler Kittur, to free Chennamma from prison. 7. The end of the rebellion. In 1830, Sangoli Rayana was caught by the British. He was publicly hanged. Shivalingappa, the adopted boy, was also arrested. Queen Chennamma remained in Bailhongal Fort. She died in prison in 1829, at the age of 51. She became a symbol of resistance and pride for generations to come. 8. Legacy of Khitta Chennamma. Facts: year of rebellion, 1824 to 1829. Location: Khitta, Karnataka. Leader: Queen Chennamma. Supporter: Sangoli's son, Shivalingappa. Issue: doctrine of lapse. Death: Chennamma died in prison in 1829. And 9. Why is this important? Chennamma's rebellion happened 33 years before the revolt of 1857. She showed that women too can be powerful leaders in times of crisis. She stood against a mighty foreign power when most Indian rulers were silent. Sangoli Rayana became a folk hero in Karnataka. Today, statues, songs, and festivals in Karnataka honor her bravery. Final thoughts. Khitta Chennamma was not just a queen, she was a warrior, a mother to her people, and a symbol of courage. Even though she lost the war, she won the hearts of the people. Her name is taken with pride and love in Indian history. Would you like me to now create a colored comic strip of this? Write a drama script or scene? Make a timeline chart? Convert it into a video idea? Let me know what you'd like next. Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of the Sawantwadi Revolt, 1844, in the simplest possible English, with background, causes, events, and outcome, explained slowly like a perfect teacher. Sawantwadi Revolt, 1844, a forgotten but brave fight against British rule, led by a Maratha noble named Fond Sawant. 1. Historical background. Before the British ruled India, many small kingdoms existed. One of these was Sawantwadi, a princely state in western India ruled by the Sawant Bonsal family, part of the Maratha community. The Marathas were strong warriors. They had fought the Mughals earlier and controlled large parts of India. But after the British defeated the Marathas in several wars, like the Third Anglo-Maratha War, many Maratha states lost their power. Sawantwadi was one such small kingdom under pressure from the British. 2. Who was Fond Sawant? Fond Sawant was a Maratha aristocrat, a noble. He belonged to the royal family of Sawantwadi. He refused to accept British control over his kingdom and wanted to keep his land independent. Fond Sawant was a proud leader, loyal to the Maratha legacy, and didn't want British officials interfering in his land. 3. Causes of the revolt. Let's understand why Fond Sawant revolted. Cause: simple explanation. British interference. British were interfering in local administration and collecting taxes directly. Loss of autonomy. Local kings like Fond Sawant were losing their power. Revenue pressure. British wanted heavy taxes from the people, causing anger. Patriotism. Fond Sawant wanted freedom for his land from foreign rule. For what happened during the revolt, 1844. Fond Sawant gathered support from local people and nobles. He raised a rebellion, a fight against British control in Sawantwadi and nearby areas. His aim: throw the British out of his territory. But the British reacted very quickly. Their army was better equipped and larger. Fond Sawant and his supporters were not strong enough to win in open battle. 5. Escape to Goa. When the British attacked, the rebels could not defend their position. So Fond Sawant and his followers ran away to Goa, a nearby territory ruled by the Portuguese, not British. Why Goa? Because the Portuguese were not helping the British, so Goa was a safe hiding place at that time. 6. Punishment of rebels. Later, The British caught many of these rebels, including those who helped Fon Sawant. They were charged with treason, betraying the British government. The punishment was very harsh. Some were imprisoned, some were tortured, and others may have been executed. 7. What was the result of the revolt? Result, meaning. Revolt failed. Fon Sawant couldn't win against British forces. Rebels punished. British treated them as criminals and punished them. British gained control. Sawantwadi came completely under British power. Inspiring legacy. Even though the revolt failed, it became part of the early Indian freedom struggle. 8. Why is this revolt important? It happened before the major 1857 revolt. Shows that many Indians were already angry and resisting British rule. Fon Sawant was one of the first brave rebels in Western India. His resistance shows early patriotism and the desire for freedom. Super simple final summary. In 1844, a Maratha noble named Fon Sawant from Sawantwadi fought against the British because he didn't want them to rule his land. He lost the battle and ran away to Goa. Later the British caught and harshly punished the rebels. This revolt showed early signs of resistance to British rule in India. Would you like a comic strip of this event? A timeline or diagram, MCQs or a quiz to remember this better? I'm here to make it even clearer.